All right, John, we may begin whenever you are ready.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone for being here so promptly. I appreciate it. Welcome to the January 24th meeting of the Community Board 6 Youth and Education Committee. My name is John Keller. I'm chair of the committee. Tonight we are joined by District Manager Jesus Perez, who is also staffing this meeting, and thank you very much, Jesus. This meeting is called to order at 6:32 p.m., I believe, at 6:33. This meeting is called to order at 6:33. As a reminder, New York state law now requires all community board members to have their cameras on and their first and last names displayed from the time the meeting is called to order until the time the meeting is adjourned. If your camera is not on and your meeting not properly displayed, you cannot count towards quorum. Thank you all for doing that. Members of the public, you can raise any questions or comments that you have through the Q&A feature of Zoom. If there is time following the committee's discussion, we'll field questions from the public, and people familiar with this committee know that we always do that. Aisha, who contacted me about a personal emergency, volunteered to take minutes tonight, so she's not here. If I don't have another volunteer, I'm very much on top of this agenda, so I will just I can do it myself. So if someone else wants to get a little practice in doing minutes, they're welcome, but otherwise I'll take care of them myself with the board, the officer's help. I'll take care of it. Okay. And you should all have received an email from the board office with a link to a doodle sign-up sheet for minute takers at your committee meetings this year. For your community convenience, the link to the sign-up sheet is being posted in the chat right now, and you can see it, but we usually have no trouble getting someone to do it. So we'll now take attendance by roll call, and Jesus will conduct the roll call.
All right, everyone, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to call your name, and please say whether you are, please say that you're present when I call your name. John Keller.
Present.
Thank you. Jonathan DeRico.
Present.
Thank you. Neil Barkley.
Present.
Thank you. Stuart Desser.
Present.
Thank you. Abigail Kruzmark. Abigail Kruzmark. All right, I don't see her, so we'll mark her absent for now. And Aisha Siddiqui, John, you said she's absent tonight?
Yes, she said she has a personal emergency, and I accept that as a valid excuse. I'm not sure what the bylaws say, but it works for me.
Okay. Matt Weintraub.
Here.
Thank you. Okay, with 5 out of 7 people present, there is quorum.
Thank you, Jesus. The agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office and appears on the screen. I would like to make, Jesus, I can make an amendment to the agenda. I would like to add a new item 3 to come before the chair's report, and that would be discussion with Environment and Parks regarding collaboration on solar power for schools and Community Board 6. So unless there are any objections to that, I would like to add that as the third agenda item in place before number 3.
All right, well, if the committee will just vote, the committee will just accept that by unanimous consent with no objections, the agenda can be adopted as amended.
So seeing no objection, the agenda for tonight's meeting is adopted. And the minutes from the November 22nd committee meeting were distributed ahead of time. If there's no objection, we will adopt these minutes as drafted. And thanks again for the drafting minutes from long, complex meeting. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting these minutes, you may raise your hand through Zoom by your right hand. Seeing no objections, the minutes from the November 22nd committee meeting are adopted and will soon be available on the CB6 website. In order to conduct an efficient meeting, let's observe a few ground rules. No one may speak until we have the floor, but we're pretty liberal about that. Committee members, if you have a question about committee business or wish to make a motion, raise your hand through Zoom. Let's observe that just for good form's sake. The chat function should not be used for committee business or questions about agenda topics. All such remarks should be made on the record by raising your hand through Zoom. Chat should only be used to alert us to technical difficulties you're having or to state in writing information like an email address that was already stated aloud on the record during the meeting. When a committee member is given the floor to speak, I'll identify you and you can unmute yourself so that you can speak. And a reminder again that committee members are required by the state open meetings law to have their Zoom cameras on and your first and last name displayed during tonight's entire meeting from call to order to adjournment. If you must step away from your computer briefly, you're required to leave your camera on. So we're going to follow the order of the adopted agenda. And the first is a discussion of unlicensed smoke shops in Community District 6. And Jesus, I sent earlier today to Brendan a brief summary and a PowerPoint document of State Senator Liz Krueger's comments at Council Member Brewer's joint committee hearing this week. And if we could put that up, I'd appreciate it.
Sure.
It's as good a way as any to summarize what's going on in an efficient manner. So these are excerpts. State Senator Liz Krueger, as you know, presented the original legislation that was passed in March of 2021. And she spoke before the New York City Committees on Oversight and Investigation, Health and Consumer and Worker Protection earlier on the 18th, a week ago tomorrow. I also delivered personal testimony at that. Since I was not speaking for a committee or the board as a whole by vote of a committee or the board as a whole, it was personal testimony, but if it's relevant, I'll share some of it later. I shared it with Senator Krueger and Gail Brewer and others already. So the overview before we get into the details of what, when I've had multiple conversations this week, this is a complex issue because you have the ultimate power here is with the state authorities, and the legislation, enabling legislation, is still with the government. Though we are told, as we all heard at the last full board meeting, that a consensus has been reached by the Assembly, Senate, and Governor on this. We still haven't seen the enabling legislation. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, if you look at the timing of the passage of this bill, which was March 6th, 2021, a lot was happening then. In addition to the end of COVID, we also had a governor who was about no longer to be governor, and he was distracted. And to Governor Hochul's credit, when she took over, she empowered the Office of Cannabis Management, OCM, which has ultimate authority over the enforcement of this law and regulation. However, the OCM's authority at this point does not extend to groups that are performing illegally or operating illegally. The store is operating illegally, so they have to go in and cite the store, and this has now become an issue in itself, where there are 60 to 90 days when stores are cited. A store that is cited frequently hires a very good lawyer who's familiar with the ins and outs of this legislation, and even if you seize all of their product, apparently the sale of this by the 1,400 stores that are now selling this product illegally in New York City is lucrative enough that they can afford to pay lawyers. So there was a vacuum. There was also 2021 was a mayoral election year in New York City. So we had a mayor who was on his way out the door, term limited, and had his mind in other areas, such as running for Congress as well, though that's not a criticism of him. That was every right to do so. But the bottom line is there was a vacuum at the state level and the city level when this law went into effect on March 6, 2021. And basically it provides for what was envisioned as a fair and inclusive legal market for adult use cannabis, a multi-billion-dollar industry. All tax revenue generated from this new regulated industry is required to be invested back into communities disproportionately hit by the drug war, drug treatment and prevention programs, and public schools. Unfortunately, when you now have 2 legal dispensaries in the entire city of New York, and 1,400 illegal dispensaries, the collecting taxes does become a bit of a challenge. I would be sarcastic there. Let's go on to the next slide. The Office of Management has, however, done a very good job and has led the way in living up to the values and goals of the law. The Seeding Opportunity Initiative started with family farmers across New York State growing adult use cannabis. They've already opened the first retail dispensary, and the second is now, I think, was just opened yesterday. And in the coming weeks, more shops will open. And here there's an equity focus on those owned by individuals with a cannabis arrest who have all also have previous business experience. And let's move to the next slide. Now, I left here Senator Krueger's statements in quotation marks because they're relevant and quite blunt. When the bill passed, we also had the expectation that then Governor Andrew Cuomo would move quickly to set up OCM, but that didn't happen. In fact, the Cannabis Control Board wasn't appointed until September of 2021 when Governor Hochul quickly took action after taking office. It was during that 6-month delay that we saw the first illicit operators begin to open, and they've only gained traction since. While local law enforcement, including the authorities here in New York City, have a role to play in shutting these operators down, they didn't initially move to act and instead looked to the state for guidance, again, quoting Senator Krueger. But with no office in place, there was no one to provide that guidance. By the time OCM had the beginning of an enforcement team, the illicit operators were already entrenched. That's what we're dealing with here. Okay, let's go on to that. And that's directly quoting Senator Krueger from her published testimony. Let's move on to the next slide. So OCM is using its existing tools. It's working with local partners like the New York City Sheriff's Office, the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection, issuing violations, seizing illegal products, shutting down illicit operators. But I was, as an aside here, I was talking to a senior staff member, to a city council member just today, and they told me that right across the street from their office, there was a shop acting illegally, which the council member accompanied the sheriff to seize the property, and she seized all of the contraband or illegal substances, all of which was replaced within 3 or 4 days. So quoting again from Senator Krueger, but I hope that the New York City Police Department also steps up its efforts to curb this activity by enforcing the penal law on offenses being committed, particularly offenses related to sales to minors. Once again, quoting the senator, there are barriers to enforcement that have been erected by law enforcement and others who are reluctant to engage. I want to be very clear with all of you that criminal offenses for the conduct you see across this city still exist. They were not wiped away when we ended prohibition. And as we go into the next slide, we'll see some more detail on that. Be as quick as I can here. Possession, and this is all Senator Krueger, possession of more than 5 pounds of cannabis is a felony. Sale of more than 16 ounces is a felony. And from the perspective of this committee, sale to a minor is a felony. And quoting Senator Krueger, while some New York City police precincts understand this, others seem to have wrongly concluded that all cannabis-related activity is now legal and they have no role to play. Now, where does that leave us? Is there another slide, or is that the last one? Trying to remember whether, yeah, here we go. There's no question that these operators must be shut down, and they're endangering public health with contaminated products and with products that don't often match the label. Though some are quite proudly labeled with their 630 grams or milligrams of THC, and they're labeled as gummy candy. They are putting consumers in danger, selling to young people, opening in locations close to schools, as we saw in our committee meeting in November, and religious institutions. And you cannot be within 500 feet of a school or 200 feet of a religious institution under the law. And they're undermining the fundamental goals of the law. They don't contribute to an equitable industry, don't contribute revenue to our communities, and damage the legal regulated operators just beginning to open. I, Senator Krueger, have closely followed as OCM began with an education first approach to ensure that illegal operators and consumers were aware of the parameters of the new law and understand that although we ended prohibition, there are still consequences to operating illegally. That's where we stand right now. We're waiting for the governor to release the legislation on which consensus has been reached. There is no point in our having a resolution on this until we have that resolution in hand, until we have that legislation in hand. In conversations with city council member, page 8, to be clear, breaking the law. All right, so I think we've got everything here.
I think
They've stepped up the enforcement activity, begun seizing large quantities, but as I said, it's quickly replaced. Recognizing that OCM needed more tools to take on these operators, Senator Krueger worked with her Senate colleagues to pass a bill in June that would have doubled financial penalties for illicit operators, allowed for the revocation of licenses for businesses selling illegal cannabis, illicit cannabis, and provided OCM and the State Department of Tax and Finance with new tools to go after those. In other words, putting more teeth into the regulations. Unfortunately, the legislation was introduced late in the session, was not passed by the Assembly, and the senator has worked closely with Assembly Minority Leader People Stokes and the governor's office to reach agreement on an updated version of that legislation that can hopefully pass both houses this year. And I think the consensus is the sooner the better in that regard. That's exactly where we stand. The city council is now now very carefully considering exactly what it can do. There are legal constraints, but there do seem to be some windows of opportunity through the public nuisance law to get landlords to be accountable for what their tenants are doing, because all of these shops are being leased to tenants who are making the sale. And Senator Krueger, as have I, made very clear, we're not calling for a return to prohibition, but we do want to make sure we all understand that those criminal offenses still exist, and we left those offenses in the law for a reason. And Senator Krueger is looking forward to working with her colleagues, and we're looking forward to working with her and the city council as we start to help this industry move ahead. I'm not sure, where that leaves us when we have 1,400 illegal entities operating. But the one thing I do know with clarity is that stores are not, it is not legal to operate one of these stores, no matter where we end up, within 500 feet of a school or 200 feet of a house of worship. And that's why we're working so closely with the business affairs and licensing Because the OCM, one of the things the governor, I think, unless I put a 10th slide in there, Jesus, I think we can get that off the screen, but thank you very much. But we're working because, welcome, Abby, it's good to see you. Working, and let the record show that Abigail Cruzmark is present, and we have 6 of 7 attending. Where we are right now is that we are going to, through business affairs and licensing, have this house where it should be. And to Governor Hochul's credit, this was originally, OCM was originally supposed to be part of the SLA, but now it is an independent entity reporting directly to the governor. So once we get going on this, we will have a say in where all of this happens in Community Board 6 zone. But there are many complex issues that need to be addressed. 1,400 of them, to be exact. So I've asked our new vice chair, Jonathan DeRico, as a present for his reward for his getting appointed, to take the lead with me. I'll ultimately have responsibility, but John is very familiar with our schools, and I'm asking him to become thoroughly familiar with the legislation as passed by the state legislature, with Senator Krueger's enabling legislation from last June, and with the activities of the city council to move this forward on behalf of our committee. That's pretty much exactly where we stand, where the city council stands, where the governor stands, and where the legislature stands. And I'm happy to take any questions from any members of the committee on the subject. And okay, Jesus, do we have any members of the public attending tonight? I don't think we publicized this.
We have 2.
And do either of them have any questions on this?
They don't have their hands up.
Okay. All right. So that is exactly where we stand. It's a daunting process, but I think from an education committee's point of view, if we keep our eyes on the prize, which is you can't have these places operating near schools, we get traction there. And from a business affairs and licensing committee point of view, if you're not in compliance with regulation, we're going to give you a problem. And from a health point of view, we will, with LV's committee, we will be moving ahead on that as well. So I'm in close contact. I have contacts now with the OCM. I have contacts with the New York City Department of Consumer and Worker Protection. And we are on top of this. We are very aware of the deep level of concern that any of you who attended and I'll make my testimony, my personal testimony, available to anyone who wants it. It's not an official board testimony, but I'm happy to make it available to anyone who is interested in it. And we will we will push on this until we have something specific to respond to from the state. Seeing no further questions from the public or from members of the committee, we'll move ahead to the second agenda item. And the second item on tonight's agenda is discussion of Councilmember Brewer's, and I'm going to pull it up here on my screen, INT number 81-2020-0081-2022. And I've had a lengthy conversation with Gail's, Councilmember Brewer's chief of staff, Shulamit Cooter Warren, on this, and have a pretty clear idea of now what would be really useful to them on this. And just since I'm looking at it here, and since many of you might not be familiar with it, This is a local law, the title to amend the administrative code of the city of New York in relation to reporting on food and nutrition education in New York City schools. The bill would require the Department of Education to annually submit to the New York City Council and post to the department's website a report on nutrition education in New York City schools. The department would be required to specify whether nutrition education is combined with other health-related education and whether it is provided by an external nutrition education provider. The report would include information about the number of certified dietitians teaching nutrition in each school. The data in the report would be aggregated by school within each grade level at each school. The data would be disaggregated by race, gender, and free or reduced price lunch status. Now, the reason, I'm raising this tonight is that there is something very practical we can do here. And without quoting anyone directly, I have the strong impression that the DOE, having worked with the DOE for so many years now, is stiff-arming this because it is not, and I would say that to anyone, because it is not required by law. The schools are required now to make reports on arts and education, for example, and other areas. They're required to say, we're taking kids to this show, and we have this art teacher, and this is what's being taught. They're not required to do this at this point. And I think from talking to people who support this legislation, it would actually be very helpful if we were to have a reso come out of a community board on this that show the Department of Education and the Chancellor and the Mayor that we are interested in it. And looking at you, Matt Weintraub, who teaches in the DOE and who is, I know, very interested in and passionate about nutrition in our schools. This is not the same as what are we giving the kids in the schools, but what it is about the infrastructure around nutrition in schools, in our schools. So, Matt, I was wondering if you would be so kind, and I'll send you all the necessary links to go through the legislation and help draft a resolution. It'll be fairly straightforward, and I'd be happy to work with you on it if you haven't done these things before. Basically urging the Department of Education, basically supporting this legislation and urging the Department of Education to be responsive when it gets through. And so I see Stuart has his hand up, but since I've already called Matt out on this, I'm going to single Matt out. I'm going to give him a chance to respond. I would really like this as a way to get you, as I know how strongly you feel about nutrition related issues, as a way to get started on this. And it's very practical and would be very appreciated by a fairly well regarded member of the city council.
Yeah, I definitely don't mind taking the lead on that.
Great.
I got some experience with writing resolutions with the incoming class or cohort.
Perfect.
Community board
Thank
member. So yeah.
That's great. No, that's great. And since Stuart has his hand up, and then I want to take advantage of having Jesus here, the district manager here, to ask him a procedural question, but I want to recognize Stuart's hand. Hi, Stuart.
Hi. So is there any curricula, any requirement that nutrition be taught in schools?
It is very vague. You could have two schools within 2 blocks of each other doing completely different things. So the first step here is to gather information on what's happening. And that's what this is. This is a data bill. This is requiring the DOE to say that a school is or is not teaching this. And it will turn out that there are many schools that are, based on my conversations, and Matt, I know this has his hand up, but based on my conversations, it will turn out that a lot of schools don't have don't teach anything about this, but Matt might be able to correct me on that.
From what I understand, it should be part of the health curriculum taught by PE teachers.
Yeah,
So I think the one thing to think about there is students don't have health every grade or every semester. So it's probably touched upon at some point, but to what extent, and to the extent that it actually manifests in better, nutrition and diets for our young people, then, I think that's untested.
yeah, and certainly as the dad of two kids that went 13 years through the system, I can certainly attest to that. It is uneven. I mean, one of my kids, just as an aside, had a biology teacher who was really into nutrition and, was creating, hydroponic food sources in her school. And then you would go and be crickets in other schools. So yeah, Stuart.
I don't have any problem with data collection, but wouldn't it make more sense to support legislation that requires nutrition and details what should be taught?
Yeah, I think that's what Gail, Councilmember Brewer, is after here, and the other joint sponsors of this legislation. But until they actually have facts, they, they're already getting stiff-armed a little bit. So I think that's the logic behind it. But we could certainly add, and I have no problem with being in the face of the DOE. We could add stipulations in our resolution that push them on that. Yes, I would totally agree with that.
I would propose that.
I accept.
Okay.
I totally accept that.
Then it's
and
going to be up to me for me to convince you of anything more.
No, I'm just really with it. And Matt, let's think about, and especially with you as a teacher, we can really take advantage of your experience there, and let's put let's figure out where in the deal. Well, first of all, this would start with the chancellor, but let's also figure out where this comes up in the DOE. I mean, there's food services, but I doubt this is a food services issue. This strikes me as a policy issue of some sort. Who this would come up through. And let's try to put together a pretty thoughtful. I'm pretty sure that with the resources we have here, we could put together a pretty thoughtful resolution on this. Yeah, kind of exciting, and we might actually have an impact. Okay, thank you. Thanks. Any other comments, either from members of the committee or members of the public on this? Jesus, do we have? I think we have one remaining member of the public,
Right.
And they're listening. That's fine. We're happy to have listeners. Okay, so that's we'll move ahead with that. And thank you very much, John, for taking the lead on help working with me on smoke shops in Manhattan, and Matt and taking the lead on letting a little fire under the DOE here a little bit. All right, and then we added a third, and I'm going to turn to Neil Barkley, who is now chair of Environment and Parks. And Neil has approached us, and I think it's a great idea, but let him make the sale here on talking about solar power and solar energy in our schools. So I'm so glad, Neil, you're still part of the committee. So let's take advantage of that.
So good evening, everyone. In the Environment and Parks Committee, we are working on putting together a climate plan for our district. And I've done some research, and a big, not an issue, but something that we could address right away would be adding solar power to our schools, specifically solar panels. Research shows that our schools rely very heavily on gas. And so if we can help to curtail the amount of gas that our schools rely on, that can have a significant impact on not only the climate of our district, but climate issues in our city overall. And so what I'm looking at is, well, one place I wanted to start was with one of the newer schools in our district, which is PS 281, the River School, which was created In the past 10 years, I think it may be 8 years old or 7 years old. And I would like to see how, what the design was there, their gas and how their energy, I guess their infrastructure, and then juxtapose that with, say, PS 116 or PS 40, Salk, Baruch, any one of those older buildings, and like I said, just compare the two. And so that's what I'm looking for. And then based upon what we find, if we can make suggestions to the city that we could obtain solar panels.
So the idea here is, if I understand it, then let Stuart ask his question. I see his hand, is that, you know, there's roof space in schools, and do you want to try to quantify the advantage, the potential advantage of putting solar panels in this particular school, or how do you want to, what's the metric, I guess, that you want to end up with here? That's not a critical question, it's just a curiosity question.
So I wouldn't have a metric right now. I just know from general research, it says that the older schools in New York, they rely heavily on gas. And so maybe percentage wise, or once we, you know, get into the details, we can see which schools, what is the percentage actually that they rely on gas for heating, or so yeah, I don't have specific numbers now.
Stuart.
All right, so first off, of course, if you produce electricity, I presume schools, like anyone else, are subject to net metering, where they can basically sell the electricity they produce back to the grid. And the incentive to electrify may not be there for the schools unless we go further. So, you know, local law 97 applies to you know, buildings in New York City, larger buildings, and obviously it won't apply to city buildings, but to privately owned buildings. There's a penalty starting in 2025, and then a much bigger one in 2030 for buildings that don't do conversions or don't become more energy efficient. So there's quite a lot of industry right now that's looking at converting the old systems from oil or gas to electric. So we're talking about heat pumps. That's a pretty expensive proposition, I would think, for a school. So it's a kind of involved question. Schools, unlike you know, apartment buildings and office buildings, are not going to be penalized. So the incentive for them is actually less.
I was wondering who to ask to run with this with Neil from the committee. And Stuart, would you, because it sounds like you're familiar with this, would you collaborate with Neil and see where this might go? I mean, it sounds like there are much more serious issues that can be raised with it, but that would be very helpful.
I'm very good at volunteering without noticing it. But
yeah, that's gotten me in a lot of trouble. Sure, I understand that myself. But is it okay with you? I mean, do you have any commitments that would make it difficult to do?
Sure.
Okay, so
That'd be great.
Thank you. So this is an exploration. You know, so we have 3 different agendas coming out of here so far. We have the cannabis, which is going to take a lot of energy, and you know, we have the nutrition education, which I think, you know, we can help on several fronts with. And now this sounds like a you know, a nascent idea that, you know, could be really interesting. I just throw in here that PS 59 I think has solar panels on the roof, which is a relatively new building. Not sure. Matt, do you have a comment?
Oh, I was just wondering if it was the time for like new business or.
Yeah, no, I was going to get into that. But I want to close this one out first. So we have that. Okay, and then I do have one in my chair's report, one piece of business that I wanted to mention. And I was going to ask Aisha to work with me on this one, so I'm going to volunteer her, even though she's not here. And that is, there's a major issue right now, and a serious issue in the city over the impact on fair student funding in our schools. A lot of this is due to the fact that we have a couple 100,000 fewer students in our schools now. And I just want to put this on the table as an issue. The mayor, the reason it wasn't on the agenda was it was just 2 days ago that the chancellor's office finally started to make a statement about how it's going to move ahead with this. There's been a working group that's been working on it. There's a DOE has issued a statement on it, a deck on it. The DOE does a lot of decks. You know, then there's an alternative view been issued on it. So, but the bottom line is that this is a lot of money that schools are not getting. And those of you that are not familiar with the weeds of fair student funding, it's, you know, school, we talk about a $32 billion budget, but the bulk of the budget that actually affects the day-to-day work of the school is something called the Galaxy budget that is controlled by the principal. And virtually all of that comes from, not all of it, but there are like 14 different funding memoranda for those of you who are interested for funding schools. But the bulk of the funding for a school comes from fair student funding. And just to give a little perspective on that, there's a formula. Every student comes in with a base level of funding. So you bring a kid, you bring funding to the school. And then on top of that, if the kid falls in English language learner group, Title I, high poverty levels, special needs, various levels of special needs, you get more funding to the school. And if you just want to think of a round number, think of $3,000 per kid. I mean, it's a lot more complicated than that, but think of $3,000 per kid. And if we're down from 1.1 million kids to, Matt might know the number quicker than I do, but somewhere around 860,000 kids down. So we're down 200,000 or 300,000 kids just in round numbers. And you multiply 200,000 by $3,000 per kid, you're talking real money out of schools. The real budgets that principals have for teachers and guidance counselors, and putting aside food and buses and all those other things that fall in other budgets, and capital budgets, it's significant. So I'm going to look into this myself just to see what we as a community board committee might do. And I was going to, and I know Aisha's interested in getting involved in issues, and so I'm going to ask her to sort of shadow me as I look at this. I don't wish getting to know the details of fair student funding and allocation memoranda on anyone, but I'll do most of that. And just so Abby doesn't feel left out, sooner or later we are going to have to deal with the issues of New York is a sanctuary city and the effect that that's having on our schools. And I'm holding our immigration lawyer, I see it, I'm holding our immigration lawyer on the bench for now on that one. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the one thing to add is, as of now, at least I heard this today, is we're not going to have to give back the money for the kids that we're missing right now, but I don't know if that's going to be a blanket policy moving forward.
That's a good one. Let me, I know I have a person on PEP that I talk to regularly, and they talk to me regularly because I don't say who they are, but so let me check that as to exactly where that all stands right now. I have pretty good network to figure that out. Matt, but you said you wanted to raise another issue. So then I will look into that and see what I think we can do that would be useful.
Yeah, I just had an idea to explore, and I was wondering, if I think it's a multiple committee, it's like a joint committee kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But I know that one issue right now is office buildings that are, not super old, but not super new, are struggling to find, people to lease out their space, and they're hurting. And then we have schools that are like 200 years old. And this is actually, Neil, I thought like this kind of connected to what you were talking about. If we thought at all about trying to transition some schools from decrepit, falling apart buildings into these office spaces that are not going to be used probably for the foreseeable future, because all the offices that are being used are, like Hudson Yards, like cutting edge stuff that's actually trying to attract talent. And all of these like mid-level and lower companies, they're realizing the overhead of an office isn't really worth it. So, and there's also a precedent. There's a school, Millennium High School downtown, that inhabits an office building that's been converted. So I think one thing, especially in the Washington Irving building, that leads to a lot of issues is having multiple schools in the same building. It leads to fighting. It leads to all sorts of issues in terms of trespassing, and then it gets into whole law enforcement issues. So I just think there's so many positives to potentially trying to relocate schools out of old buildings into potentially unused office buildings. So that was just something I thought we could explore.
Jesus, which board committee would that most properly fall under, do you think? I think it's a great idea, and Ben, it's something Ben Kalos talked about
You mean
for a long time.
You mean the issue Matthew just raised?
Right? Yes.
Well, given that it does involve schools, it would be great for the Youth and Education Committee. Given that it does involve buildings, there could also be crossover potential with the Land Use Committee.
Yeah, I was thinking that actually. Yeah. Yeah. Why don't I, if Matt will agree, let me. When is the next exec meeting? Jesus.
The next executive committee meeting is February 15th.
Okay, so it's the week after the next full board. So why don't I reach out to Sandy as the chair of that committee, right? Just to be sure I have the right chair, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why don't I reach out to Sandy before the next meeting and see where that might fall. And Neil, I don't know whether Environment and Parks and Stuart, I see your hand, I'll be right with you, but Neil, would this fall on Neil's committee at all? I mean, the Environment and Parks, it sounds a little, but sounds like more it belongs with land use.
I was just thinking in relation to the energy usage, because again, I work in an extremely old building that uses ridiculous equipment. I've been down in the boiler room. It looks like kind of like a, I don't even know how to describe it, 18th century factory. But
yeah, I haven't been in that boiler room, but I've been in others in schools, and I think I know what you're talking about.
You re-equipping, and then you turn those office buildings into schools, and you figure out a way to either shut down the school building or turn it into something else. Isn't energy draining energy all the time? Like that.
Recognizing that Stuart's trying to speak, I'll just add that this is something Ben Kalos thought about a lot when he was on the city council. Ben had a lot of very creative ideas, and he was thinking more micro about pre-K, finding a storefront for pre-K. But you're thinking on a bigger scale, so that's good. Stuart.
Are you talking about spreading the schools out into different buildings, essentially? Is that right? I'm asking because isn't there an efficiency in concentrating these smaller schools into a larger facility? I mean, you might share certain classes, you share the cafeteria, and security and so forth.
Yeah, and I'm saying that sharing of things leads to bad outcomes for our young people.
Yeah, this is an old debate. I mean, going back to Mayor Bloomberg's days, of disaggregating schools. We're not going to solve it here. There are obviously scale arguments to be made, especially when you come to the infrastructure that supports a school. And as Matt points out, sharing a cafeteria doesn't necessarily mean everybody's playing nice in the cafeteria, or as you've discovered in your location, getting the trash put out. I mean, we had, we won't rehash that issue. That's an old one, but and as I always tell the story, and apologize if I've said it before, the well-known principal of one of our K to 5 schools, pre-K to 5 now schools, who was once kicked out of her own cafeteria by the head of the food services because she made a suggestion as to what the cafeteria should be serving. So they don't always play nice together when they spread out. But okay, so let's leave this. But let me reach out to land use and ask Sandy, how that committee might work with us, and Matt, obviously. I think the other issue, the food and nutrition education issue, is fairly straightforward and should be off your plate in a month or so. But this one sounds like it could go on for a while if there is an interest in it. So why don't we just stagger that on that? So great. So that is Jesus, please.
Sorry, I will say, well, it's good to try and seek areas for cooperation within the committees. If the committee maybe doesn't seem interested or has a lot on their plate, there's nothing stopping this particular committee from running with any of these ideas on their own. I might offer one bit of advice, because often what happens is members will come up with ideas, and some of them are rather ambitious. They're going to be heavy lifts, and they're not going to be the sort of thing that, okay, let's just spend 20 minutes talking about it at one meeting, write a resolution, and it'll be done. It'll be the kind of thing, like John said, that'll require months and months, if not much longer, of attention. Maybe start, Matt, for example, since you came up made the suggestion, be the point person for that. Start doing as much research as you possibly can, identifying perhaps buildings that you could possibly could be good candidates for this thing. And sort of, it's going to be a lot of beating the drum over and over and over and over again. I imagine the schools are going to have to be involved. Maybe if schools themselves start clamoring for this, this could turn into more than just a resolution. It could become a budget request or something like that. There are ways to sort of really take these ideas and run with them. But typically it's going to be a very long slog, and it's going to have to be a lot of research and a lot of saying the same things over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's why I'm glad, Matt, we have you on the food thing right away, which I think should be a quick hit. And I think this other issue is a longer term slog. Matt, please.
Oh, I hear you, Jesus. I've been in this kind of building for my entire career. So, and it seems like my foreseeable future, but my principal in it, and I've already started doing the research. It would take about 15,000 square feet to do it. So I'm on balls rolling, but
yeah,
thank
no,
you.
This is the way stuff happens. And all we need is, my experience, and we're coming up on an hour, so I'd like to respect people's time, but my experience is that you get one good example of something to start, and I will reach out. Ben Kalos is a good friend of this committee, so I'm going to reach out to him just informally and to say, hey, Ben, how'd it go when you came up with that idea, and just ask him what the obstacles were and what he found. So I'll just do that informally, just to see where that stands. With that, I'm done. I'm putting fair student funding as a topic, but I'm not saying what exactly we're going to be able to do on it. I just don't know. But I do know that on cannabis, on food and nutrition education, and on collaborating with Neil and Environment and Parks, and looking towards and collaborating with land use on office building space, I think we have some pretty practical things to be concerned about. We have people taking accountability for them. So, Jesus, do you have any other comments or observations or?
No, just like best of luck with all those things. I know Kyle particularly likes to see this sort of thing. I do too, in sort of trying to breathe new life into community boards so they don't tumble into obsolescence. This sort of think tanky type of ideas that may be really, really, really long shots, but these long shots have to start somewhere, and what better place than right within the local communities they might affect the most.
I love it, and I also love it if you can luck out on stuff like this and just get the perfect example, where you have a school near a building because it all works, Most of the time it doesn't work that way, but we'll see. Anyway, so we're at coming up on the 7:30 mark here, and I like to respect people's time for being here. I'd like to once again wish Neil well in his new responsibilities and welcome John to his new responsibilities here, and thank Stuart for volunteering again, and thank Matt for the creative thinking. Just never know where it's going, and Abby, we will definitely. I have a feeling that something is going to surface very soon as a concern on, and it's actually part of the fair student funding issue. How the students in temporary housing, it's a big part of this issue. So anyway, seeing no further business, anybody else have any business? I'm going to move that we adjourn at 7:29 p.m. We made it by a minute. Okay, thank you everybody, thanks for being here.
Have a good night.
Good night.